The Senate, back from its August recess, started debate today on a resolution to disapprove the nuclear deal with Iran. But with three more Senate Democrats, Ron Wyden of Oregon, Gary Peters of Michigan, and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, all coming out in favor of the deal this morning, and with Senator Maria Cantwell, Democrat from Washington State, announcing her support tonight, well, the deal now has 42 votes in the Senate, and that is enough to block the resolution altogether with a filibuster and keep it from getting to President Obama's desk for a veto. It is a momentous victory for the White House and a crushing defeat for the forces aligned against the deal, from lobbying groups like AIPAC to neoconservative think tanks to Republican presidential candidates. But some of them aren't ready to move on without trying to extract some kind of political benefit from the debacle. According to Politico, congressional Republicans are discussing the possibility of voting on Friday, September 11th, to put maximum political pressure on Democrats. Taking a cue from Alanis Morissette, John Cornyn, the Senate's #2 Republican, tweeted, "Ironic that Congress may vote on the Iran nuke deal on 9/11. Tomorrow, Ted Cruz and Donald Trump are set to hold their much-anticipated Stop the Iran Deal rally on Capitol Hill. But today belonged to former Vice President Dick Cheney, who argued against the deal in a speech at the American Enterprise Institute.
With the removal of restrictions on Iran's ballistic missile program, this agreement will give Iran the means to launch a nuclear attack on the U.S. homeland. What President Obama is asking the United States Congress to do is unique, historically and dangerously unique. The results could well be catastrophic.
Cheney's speech came after a remarkable interview over the weekend about how his own administration helped strengthen the Iranian regime.
During your time, let's put these numbers up on the screen, Iran went from 0 known centrifuges in operation to more than 5,000. So, in fairness, didn't you leave, the Bush-Cheney administration, leave President Obama with a mess?
Well, I don't think of it that way. In fact, there was military action that had an impact on the Iranians. It was when we took down Saddam Hussein.
But the centrifuges went from 0 to 5,000.
Well, they may well have gone, but that happened on Obama's watch, not on our watch.
No. By 2009, they were at 5,000.
Joining me now, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell, who made big news this weekend with his endorsement of the Iran deal. Colonel, your response to Cheney's apocalyptic warnings about this deal today?
Well, the exchange you just characterized in that clip sort of personifies what my appreciation of Dick Cheney is. I've been searching for a single word that would describe Dick Cheney, and I'm afraid the only one I can think of is insanity. It's a deliberate, it's a methodical, it's a lucid, often lucid insanity, but it's insanity nonetheless. He can't recognize reality. He can't recognize the truth. The good thing, Chris, for this country is that independents, Republicans, and Democrats wish he would just go away now. He has almost no influence. You saw the influence he has virtually by numbers, those at the AEI today listening to his speech. That's about it.
What do you make of this idea? I mean, Cheney and his daughter, they want to talk about Iran and what a sort of terrifying regime it is, how it's growing larger, and yet really fail to acknowledge the fact that one of the largest geopolitical boons to Iran, unquestionably, was the war in Iraq. I mean, they have essentially a proxy government sitting in Baghdad. We have, members of, we have Qasem Soleimani and the Quds Force and all sorts of Iranian power being projected into Iraq, all of which is a result of the Iraq War.
You could go on in that regard, Chris. I can't understand why this man, who's portrayed, for example, in Bartholomew Sparrow's monumental biography of Brent Scowcroft, fresh out, called The Strategist, as for 30 years at least of his career being, and I saw him as Secretary of Defense being, a rather brilliant strategist, a rather brilliant man. All of a sudden, he's turned into this person who simply cannot recognize reality. I can't explain it. Maybe it's physiological. Maybe it's biological. Maybe 9/11 did something to him. After all, he was in charge when 9/11 happened, the greatest attack on American territory since Pearl Harbor. that might have shocked him somewhat. I can't explain it, Chris. He is simply devoid of reason, and he doesn't recognize reality anymore.
You know, you mentioned 9/11, and I was so struck today reading that account today that the Republicans may to put maximal political pressure on Democrats, take this vote on 9/11, and Cornyn talking about the irony. I mean, quite clearly, bin Laden hated the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime hated him back. They hated the Taliban. They have nothing to do with each other except, I guess, you know, their faith, the part of the world. What do you make of this idea that a 9/11 vote somehow will put political pressure on Democrats?
Cheney and Rove mastered the process of associating things that really get a number of the American people, if not a small majority, excited and fearful. Yesterday, Chris, my seminar explored Harry Truman and the Korean War, and Senator McCarthy came up from Wisconsin, the anti-communist scare and so forth. And I couldn't help but think there's a portion of Dick Cheney today that reminds me of Joseph McCarthy. The kind of baiting, the kind of fearful rhetoric and so forth. This is the sort of thing that paranoids do. I think McCarthy was a paranoid. I think Cheney may have gotten to that point now, too. There are people you can excite with this kind of illogic. All you have to do is associate the fearful object with something else. It's totally illogical, but it works.
You know, that's a great point about the Cold War, because in many respects, one of the great sort of strategic blunders continually made by the U.S. during the Cold War was projecting onto communism this sort of monolithic nature, right? That they're all communists, they're all working for each other, whether it's the Chinese or the Vietnamese or the Russians in Moscow, and that proved to not be the case in any way. And it strikes me that to have the Iran vote on 9/11 shows some sort of similar thinking about the, quote, threat.
I think so. I think that's the way you get some of the American people exercised about a threat that's really different from the way you're describing it, or in some cases is not even existent. And then you get a lot of money allocated to the military-industrial complex and all this rest of the thing. Cheney's a millionaire now, so maybe I'm assuming his insanity, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he sees this as a way, as a route to success, and it turned out to be profitable. His personal finances now are quite well established. He's a multimillionaire. This is a man who in 1998, Chris, said most forcefully as CEO of Halliburton that sanctions were not working,
right,
that they wouldn't work unless they were comprehensive and international, and he wanted to do deals with Iran, and so he was bashing sanctions up one wall and down the other. This is a man who's lost his mind in some respects, in my view.
All right, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.